Okay, so welcome to Emergent Eye Gaze. Today's webinar is an introduction. It's a huge topic, but we want to be able to give you an introduction mainly to the resources that we've been working on, and also have that opportunity for you to ask questions and start thinking about how we use eye gaze with our really emergent users. So we're talking about potentially young children who haven't ever been exposed to eye gaze before. Maybe we're not sure of their skills yet. Maybe we're working with older adults with disability who haven't ever had access to a communication system or being able to operate a computer. So we're looking at the really emergent level today and what skills it takes to operate eye gaze. For our users who are literate, who maybe have a degenerative condition or acquired injury, they probably don't need to go through these stages. It'll be something quite quick that they learn. So we're really thinking about that context of emergent users. I'm a speech pathologist by background. I'm based over here in Perth in Western Australia. We obviously have a big team of people at Link Assistive that can help you. So please, following today, or if you're watching this online, please get in touch with us if you have any questions. So in the chat, you'll notice the workbook, which is called Implementing Eye Gaze for Emergent Users. You might want to open that up. There's also games for the eye gaze pathway, again, as a resource to help you out. And we're going to talk lots about the eye gaze pathway developed by Toby Dynavox, and you'll have those links in the workbook as well. So just to start off, there's a lot more to eye gaze than I think I first realized when I started exploring this technology. I think it would have been, I don't know, about 10, 12 years ago when eye gaze first came out. They were big eye gaze units and they weren't always really accurate. I think I thought that I just turned it on and I looked at stuff and it would all work really smoothly and easily. I think what I want to highlight today is how much goes into being able to operate a piece of eye gaze technology, and there's a lot below the surface that we can get ready and that we can teach people even prior to them trying eye gaze. So there's a lot beneath the surface that we're going to tackle today. So in terms of just quickly, what, who, and why, what is eye gaze? It's a method for operating a device or a computer. Similar to being able to touch, use a mouse, use a switch. There's lots of different ways we can operate things. Eye gaze is just one option. It's not better than another. It's a very individual thing that you want to look at as to what access method is most suitable for that person, but also what they're doing. So sometimes we have users that might use eye control for sending emails, writing their memoir or something, and they use their switch for their call bell or something like that. So the same way we think about multimodal access methods, we think about multimodal communication, multimodal access, what's most efficient and effective. Oh, thanks, Denisha. Jade, do you want to just dump them in again for those that joined a bit later? They might not be able to see the workbooks in the chat. Thank you. Eye gaze devices have a computer system. At the moment, it's Windows. There's some work happening in regards to iPads. There's an eye tracker that attaches to the computer or is inbuilt into the computer. And then there's software that reads the reflections from a user's eyes and calculates where they're looking at the screen so they can operate that piece of technology. What we're finding is that it can be used with a much wider range of users than we potentially used in the past. So I'm starting to see really young children. We're looking at eye control. I've got a little one at the moment was 18 months old when we first started exploring eye control to give him a way to operate something himself. As a little guy with cerebral palsy who has lots to say. And as we were doing trials, we really realized how much he had to say and how much problem solving he could do to play games. And And it was really amazing that I've never thought to put someone that young on eye control. So I think we really want to think about who, I guess, broaden our thoughts of who might be suitable for eye control, because we don't really know until we put them on it. I'm sorry everyone's having trouble getting the workbook. Hopefully Jade can resolve that in the background. Otherwise, we'll get it to you afterwards.
Yeah. Sorry, yeah. Can you see them, Amy? Because they're looking like they've uploaded on my end.
I can see them. Yeah.
Okay. And I've made sure it's sent to everyone. Okay, thanks everyone. So Kate can see them. Very interesting. Make sure you're in the, I'm not sure. For anyone who can't see them in the chat now, make sure you scroll all the way up. We will send them to you afterwards.
Yeah, we'll download your email and we'll send it. It might be if you're on an iPad or on your phone or something, might not come up as well. We'll get Jade onto it in the background. Sorry about that. All right, so we're kind of looking really broad as to who might be useful for. One thing really to take away is that using your eyes to see is really different to using your eyes to control an object, to be able to look and select. It is a skill to be able to use your eyes in the way that we need to when we're using eye gaze technology. There's some really interesting research coming out at the moment looking at children, typically developing children, using eye control technologies and comparing them to using an iPad via touch. What's really interesting is the preliminary results are coming out to say that intuitively, typical kids can operate an iPad with touch, but when they're put in front of eye gaze technology, they require a lot more support and explicit teaching on how to use it and how to use their eyes to control something on the screen. So I think that's something we have to think about when we're working with these really emergent users, is that they're having to learn a motor skill and a visual skill and potentially a language skill as well. So we've got to think about that. Tobii Dynavox has brought out an eye gaze pathway, and there's a few different pathways out there. When you have a read through the workbook, there's some links to one that Indigo has made. I think Inclusive Technologies have some pathways as well. And what this can do is, for us as therapists and also for the people that are supporting the individual, is think about, well, what are the stages in how we teach someone to use their eyes to control, and making sure that we're kind of not expecting them to jump up to operating the computer straight away when we haven't quite yet learned that different parts of the screen make different things happen. So to use eye gaze technology, we need to be able to control our eye movements. And this is something I've really noticed over the years, is the same with our hands and our legs and other muscles in our body can often be really difficult for someone to control, particularly our people with cerebral palsy or other motor disorders. Our eyes are the same. It's still a muscle. So to move them, you have to have that control and accuracy. And that might not be something that you can do straight away, but with practice and practice of that motor skill, you become more accurate and more consistent. We need to be able to switch using our eyes to be able to see and look around and process visual information. And then we have to be able to switch that to using your eyes to select on the screen. So there's a cognitive demand on that, being able to, I'm looking at what I want, okay, now I need to switch into looking at that item and selecting it. We often have large cognitive demands on the task. So if I'm using, for example, if I'm using eye control to write an email, I've got to think about what I want to say. My eyes have to do the motor movement. My visual processing has to look at the keyboard and what I'm selecting. All those kinds of things are all coming together in that cognitive demand of the task. So when we're thinking about emergent users, we're going to talk about how do we reduce some of those cognitive demands as we're learning the motor skills and the visual skills for learning eye control. So we're going to talk through these six levels, which is on the Tobii Dynavox eye gaze pathway. And like I said, there's other resources you can access as well. In talking about assessment, because lots of people ask me about how do you know if eye gaze is suitable for someone? Assessment's really dynamic in this space. It is a newer piece of technology. We don't have lots of research out there yet, but we do know that observation is our most powerful tool. And I think we know that in general of how we work as therapists. So I often say to people, you've got to try it first. We've got to get someone on the eye gaze device and see what happens. We've got to watch what they do and not just watch what's happening on the screen, but watch their eyes and watch their movements. So I often stand behind the device so I can see where that person is looking, what they're visually attending to. Is the computer responding in the way that they're looking, or is the technology failing them? Because sometimes it's the technology, not the person's eyes. So you've got to look really carefully. We've also got to teach it. So we can't expect someone to be able to operate this technology by just putting it in front of them. So using phrases like, I need to look at the screen to make the music play, or I look at the one I want to choose, being able to teach them, and we'll talk about some of those skills. We might then need to adjust things. So we might think, oh, those targets look a bit small, let's make them bigger and see what happens. Or the particular game we're playing is really visually complex with a lot of colors and objects on the screen. Maybe they're not able to see that. Maybe they're visually processing, that visual processing is difficult for them. So maybe let's try something that is more high contrast, has less visual complexity on the page. Try it, see what happens, and keep adjusting it. So it's very dynamic in how we implement eye gaze, how we assess for it, and making notes around the things you notice, because that's going to support you in determining, is this an access method and a tool that could be useful for this individual? We've also got to think about the environment, both that person's internal sensory environment. Are we seeing inconsistency in their skills, or them not being able to use the technology because of pain, hunger, illness, something internal to them? Perhaps the external sensory environment impacts. I know for a lot of my emergent users who are really trying to, maybe they've got cortical vision impairment, that external sensory environment can be really important to consider. So making sure that it's quiet and we're not having to process auditory information as well. Maybe we need to turn the lights down because we're needing to focus just on one visual stimulus, for example. Maybe we've got siblings running around in the background that's distracting as well. So thinking about that external sensory environment when you're trialing with these emergent individuals. Other things that are a factor is fatigue, other health factors that are happening. It is really tiring using eye gaze. If you haven't tried eye gaze before, have a go yourself before you put your client on. I often get families and support people to have a go at using the eye gaze, because I think it's important to have an understanding of what it takes to use it, and it does get tiring. So I tend to say short, sharp when you first start, short, sharp sessions to introduce it. We've also got to think about positioning. So one of the key factors with eye control technology is that the camera has to be able to see that person's eyes. So you get a bit of a track status on the devices when they arrive, and that's something that if you're loaning a device through us, we can help you with all that technical aspect of the device. So we need to have it in a position which is usually about 45 centimeters away from the person and parallel to their face. So their posture becomes really important. Think about their seating position. Are they well supported? Their head, neck, torso, pelvis, feet, are they all well supported so that they're not using all that energy in terms of keeping themselves upright and stable? So we want to be able to direct all our cognitive attention and our energy towards the task of using the device. We've got to think, therefore, about mounting. So do we need to attach it to a wheelchair? Is this person most stable lying in bed? Maybe it's in a significantly reclined position. So we need to think about how we can, I guess, put the device in a position where that person is most comfortable, most stable, and most supported. So something to maybe get physios and OTs involved with if we think, oh, this person really needs to have some more stable posture, to really show us if this technology is going to be useful for them. So let's have a quick look at the eye gaze pathway at each level. So the first level is screen engagement. And this is where we're really trying to do that cause and effect of, I look at the screen and something happens. So it might be an activity like this one. This is on Look to Learn, called Magic Mouse. And when I look at the screen, the butterflies appear. When I look away from the screen, the butterflies disappear. And so we can give that individual feedback on that to go, oh, you looked at the screen, the butterflies came up. Can you do it again? Look at the screen and make it happen. So you're trying to get that relationship between when I look at the screen, something happens, and moving through that first kind of level of understanding of using my eyes to control. We then move up to a responding level where the person starts to realize that they get different responses when they look at different parts of the screen. So that might be something like a photo or a visual scene display where you've put hotspots that if you look at her, it's, oh, that's my sister Sophie. And if I look over here, that's a bird, those kinds of things. So that the person is making a connection that where I look on the screen performs a different task or a different stimulus. So that might be a photo, that might be, I don't know, games with different sounds in different parts of the screen. In this example, it's just a photo and the communication partner's commenting on where the mouse is as to what that person's looking at. Looking at Mum and Sarah holding hands. There's Dad giving a high five.
And there's that bird. I can see you looking at the bird. Ate all our lunch.
And that can be a nice assessment tool to see, well, what sparks this person's visual attention? Maybe it's a photo of their family. Maybe it's Bluey or the Wiggles or something that they love. I think one of the big things with emergent users is trying to find things that are motivating and capture their visual attention that they want to look at, because that's going to give you information. Okay. Next level up is about exploring right round the screen. So what you might notice in those first couple of levels, some emergent users, they just kind of look along the bottom of the screen in a horizontal type way. To really use eye control technologies, you have to be able to operate different parts of the screen and around the screen. So you might have an activity, and again, all this software is on the devices, where you bring up a visual scene where different parts of the screen you can explore and they do different things. So look at the cactus. And I think it's about finding things that are age appropriate. If you're working with adults who are emergent users, you might not want to use the kiddie games. You might want to find painting activities or Maybe you're looking at card games or photos of that person's family, music, video that they like. So really think about the person in finding what will suit them, and hopefully the resources give you some of those ideas. Throughout those 3 levels, I kind of want to highlight that we still want to give access to communication in a robust way. What we're acknowledging in those early levels is that we're working on motor skills and we're working on cognitive skills. So we're not necessarily working on language at a symbolic level at this point on the eye control device, because we don't have the motor skills to target and select yet. But it's really important that we're modeling low-tech, paper-based communication systems. Maybe you are modeling electronically, but we're not necessarily expecting them to make meaningful communication yet, because we're still learning the operational skills of using the technology. So have a think about how we model in eye gaze activities. In the workbook, there's an aided language display, just a 1-pager of symbols that maybe you could use to talk about the games. Wow, I liked this one. Let's do some more. I saw how you did that. So we're starting to expose our users to symbolic language and robust symbolic language. Because again, we want to do some parallel learning. We want to learn the motor skills and the cognitive skills of operating eye control, but we also need to do the parallel learning of language and symbolic-based communication, because once we put the symbols on the device, in my experience, I'm much more successful if that individual has been exposed to symbolic language before, that they're visually familiar with what those symbols mean. So think about that, when you're starting to introduce eye gaze, even at those early levels. After we start exploring and our person is looking around the screen and starting to realize that different things happen, you might notice that their attention to the screen has increased. So maybe they just had fleeting visual attention to the screen, but now they're really starting to explore. Maybe they have some favorite games. Maybe they keep going back to similar places on the screen because they've worked out that it's their eyes that's operating it. To be able to use eye gaze for communication or for operating the computer and things, you have to be able to then target, because you want to be able to select exactly what you want. So there are some early targeting games, such as, you can use Look to Learn, something like in the sensory, there's custard pies. And when you look at the target, draw a pie. So this is pretty errorless. You can explore as well to find them, but what you're starting to work on is targeting, that it matters where I look at the screen. If I just look into the black section, nothing's going to happen. Again, you might want to change the pictures. You might want to set up, I know for one little girl I work with, she loves Frozen, the movie. So we've got Elsa there, and when she looks at Elsa, it plays some of Let It Go. So you can customize and create activities, and targeting is a really big skill to learn. At this stage, I don't have to hold my gaze at all. All that's happening is kind of when I fleetingly look at it, then something's going to happen on the screen. As we start to move up to choosing, that's where we're working on dwelling our gaze. So for eye control to be, I guess, purposeful and selective, we've got to have a way to look at it and then say, yes, that's definitely what I want. You can do that through dwelling your gaze. So I'll show you an example in a second, but I look at the target and you'll see the clock go round for the time that you need to hold your gaze to select it. We can adjust that time, and for our emergent users, you might make it really quick to start with and then slowly work it up. You can also select via a switch. So some people like to use a combination access. So I look at what I want, and when I'm looking at it, I click my switch and that will select it. And you can also do a blink as well, but I haven't found that to be too common. Most of my emergent users from a cognitive demand point of view, Dwell seems to work the best. So in choosing, we can make it errorless, or in this case, it's a game of memory. So now I have to hold my gaze. So I'm purposely selecting. It's not just kind of cause and effect happening on the screen like our pathway levels before. And there's different levels of choosing. So you might, this is obviously a higher cognitive demand task, but maybe you start with something that's errorless. So it doesn't really matter which one I choose, something's going to happen. So for some of my individuals, that might be Wiggles songs, that I have three Wiggles music things on the screen. Doesn't matter which one they look at, but something's going to happen. Maybe it's something like this, that we're playing Simon Says, and it doesn't matter what one I do, Mum's going to stand up and dance or make a funny face and things. So you can do different levels of choice making and choosing, but you're starting to work on Dwell as your operational skill. One of the documents that is in the chat for those that can see it, or otherwise will be on the website alongside this video, is a big table of different games you can use at these levels. So you can download that. On most of Link Assistive's devices, you'll have all these games available to you. So we hope that it gives you a little bit of a start point to do some of that dynamic assessment and see where that individual's eye control skills are, and give you opportunities to really work them up and develop their skills. In this world of funding applications, and also, I guess, being accountable that we are making best use of our technology, goals are really important. And I think eye control goals can be challenging to set, particularly if we don't really know what that user can do yet. We're still in that phase of dynamic assessment. Similar to any other communication device trials, you want to set your goals across the 4 areas of communicative competence by Janice Light. That's something that if you're applying for funding, you want to be able to report back on. So here are some examples, and in the workbook, I've got examples at each of the levels across these 4 areas of competence. Please remember that everybody is an individual. These are only just examples to give you some ideas. So yeah, think about their priorities for communication and learning. But we hope that giving you some examples helps think about what kinds of goals you're working at each level of the pathway. So you might set linguistic goals around combining words, 3 words, using multimodal communication strategies, because again, we don't want to disregard any other strategies that they're using. So maybe we have a more general goal, and the eye gaze device is adding to what communication they have already. Probably the biggest thing to think about is operational skills. So this particular person is working at the choosing level of dwelling their gaze for maybe 2 seconds to select a target on the screen. You can still do social goals. Maybe we just have a 1-by-1 grid to say your news that day, because it's kind of I guess what you're after is that social participation, and does the device allow that? You also want some strategic goals. So can we gain attention from someone using the eye gaze device, for example? Or can I use the eye gaze device in combination with my other strategies for communication? So with this emergent group, in particular, think about operational goals, but thinking also that your linguistic, social, and strategic are realistic with the operational skills of that individual at the time. We want to monitor progress. again, we've got to have some evidence of what we're doing. You could do this by trial diaries, so getting people to write down a description of what happened and any comments. Maybe you do rating scales. In some of the software, you can record what happens on the screen. So that heat map there with Shoot is in Look to Learn. Maybe your goals initially around screen engagement or exploring the screen, and you could save those heat maps over the trial to be able to prove that they're now looking at more parts of the screen. They're able to access and make something happen in different corners. I've certainly worked with individuals where that's been a big goal for us, that because of their eye movements, it's really easy for them to go horizontal, but to be able to get the top corners is really hard. So, you know, that had been part of our goals, is that that individual will be able to activate all corners of the screen, for example. So you might be able to use some of those inbuilt tools to help monitor and track progress. And again, that all looks good in funding applications. This particular one here is a software program called Gaze Viewer, and you can actually record the screen as someone's using it. I find that can be a really handy tool for people, individuals who you think, oh, I'm just not really sure what they're looking at and if it's purposeful. So again, if you're thinking about monitoring progress, please chat to us as you have devices on trial. So in terms of teaching eye gaze skills, just quickly, to use eye control, we have to be able to control our eye muscles, look and target around the screen in different directions, horizontal, vertical, diagonal, and that's a motor movement. We've got to understand and be familiar with content of the screen. We've got to be visually be able to see items on the screen. I often get asked, can people who are blind use eye control? The answer is that the computer would, like, something would happen because it's reading reflection off your eyes, but it wouldn't be useful because you can't see and target. So sometimes just think about that, particularly with our emergent users. You know, we will notice, are they actually visually seeing this, or is this just reflection? I had a young kid who really just roamed the bottom of the screen, and that was just his eye movement, and we found that eye control was not suitable for him, and he really needed auditory scanning because he wasn't visually seeing a lot of the screen. We've got to be positioned so we can maintain head position, visual attention, and we've got to balance all those demands of language, cognition, environment, fatigue. Some strategies when you are working with someone in this emergent phase. I use verbal referencing a lot. You looked at the screen, you made the xylophone play, causal language instructions. So look at dance if you want mum to dance, or look at the xylophone to make music. So you're kind of telling them what they need to do to make something happen. Similar to other teaching strategies, you can use visual prompts. Some people use a torch or a light cue to kind of attract visual attention on the screen. Sometimes I just plug in a mouse and kind of hover it around to try and attract visual attention. You can wave your finger to get attention up to those top screens. You can obviously model using the touch screen as well. It depends a little bit on the individual. Some individuals I've worked with, if I've touched the screen, then they've wanted to reach out and touch it. So I've been more successful modeling using a mouse plugged in. So again, prompts and strategies are individual. We do want to model to them how to use the device. I often get in people to watch me first and show them, because it can be a bit daunting trying something new and just showing them that nothing's going to touch them or nothing's going to happen. Maybe they want to watch mum and dad do it, or their brother or sister first. And like I said before, we want to use multimodal communication and really reinforce and discuss using low-tech systems as we move through that pathway. So eye gaze is just one part of the toolbox of communication strategies. The technology has its limitations in terms of positioning. So for some individuals, You know, they may only be able to operate the technology when they're in a supported seating system, but they still need other tools when they're in bed, for example, or maybe lying on the couch. So we still want to value those paper-based systems, facial expressions, our simpler pieces of technology like a Big Mac and things that still may have their place in that toolbox of strategies that someone uses for communication, play, and learning. So supporting communication, we've talked about this, but communication happens at all stages of the pathway. So you don't need to wait until you get to choosing to start doing communication. You can do it in other ways. You might want to give them time to just babble on a communication page set to explore it and see what happens. And I think the more we keep things social and meaningful and fun and of interest to someone, that's where we really see what they are able to do with this technology. So in terms of practical tips, try the device yourself first. If you get a new one, unpack it, turn it on, set up the mount so you feel confident in using it. Get to know how the technology works. That's what your suppliers are there for. That's what we're here for, is to help you learn to use the technology. And when we use each of them, for example, for those first few stages of the eye gaze pathway, screen engagement, exploring, even to targeting, I just line someone up with the track status, make sure that it's kind of capturing their eyes, but I don't do calibration at that point in time. Calibration is where you watch the dots along the screen and the tracker gets to know that person's eyes. That task is a cognitive task in that you need to understand to look at the screen, but you also need to be able to target. So I tend to start by just putting someone in front of it, see what happens, make sure it's lined up. And then as they get to that targeting stage, that's when I might try a 1-point calibration just with one dot. Maybe they can do 2, and then starting to teach them that calibration process once they have the understanding of that they need to look at the screen. We've got to think about the environment, external and internal. Find what's of interest to the person, and please ask for help. Tech support's available. Sometimes the technology gets glitches in it and things aren't working. So stay calm and give us a call, whether it's a Link assistive device or another supplier. So that comes to the end of the information component. I'm going to stop the recording, and then we can open up to any questions, dump them in the chat.